If you have ever struggled with feeling unloved, feeling unworthy, feeling undeserving of good things in your life, this message today is for you. And I believe that it is finding you and reaching you at just the right time. Fun fact that I'll share with you right off the top here is that multiple private clients who have paid me well over $100,000 in total over the years for one-on-one coaching have said to me that this one breakthrough, this one healing, particularly from this one story that I'm about to share and what it shifted for them and what it healed on the inside of them and what it did for their life, that was worth everything they paid and more, that this was their number one breakthrough overall of our work together. So it's a big one that is coming to you today. And if you have heard me speak before or worked with me in any capacity or taken one of my programs, you may have heard me talk about this in some form in the past, because this really is so near and dear to my heart. And I can honestly tell you, what I am sharing with you today has brought me to the point of tears many times over the course of my life. And really, even in just the preparing for this teaching, I found myself in tears at least once, maybe twice. I can't remember, but I'm very excited to bring this one to you today. Welcome in to the Stephen Lovegrove Show. I am so glad that you're here. All things are possible for the one who believes. And yes, that really does mean all things. And that really does mean you. You are the one, and I am here to support you in being the one who believes. If you would, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for notifications. I greatly appreciate it, and it's a simple but effective way for you to tell the algorithm, I want more content that feeds my soul, that feeds the love in my heart, that feeds my connection with God. And this is certainly that. I will tell you today, if you are watching this or listening to this, you got to know as we get started here that you are more prayed over as this teaching comes to you than you could possibly imagine. You are more prayed over than you can fathom right now. How do I know that? Well, number one, as I have been preparing for this teaching specifically, knowing it was going to be a breakthrough day for people, knowing it was going to be a healing day for people, knowing it was going to be a life-changing, never forget it, shift kind of day for people, I have specifically prayed for you, watching and listening to this, that you would get it at just the right time, that you would hear what you need in this message, that God would speak through me directly to you, that it would speak to your situation, to your doubt, to your fear, to your pain, to your concerns, and that you would get everything you need, everything you want, and more by the time this teaching was complete. So I prayed over you today, and have been praying over you specifically in getting ready for this teaching. But I also want you to know that I have felt a call to do healing work in the world for a long, long time in my life now. And I counted, it has been literally at least 11 years at the time of this recording that I have prayed over everybody who my work and my ministry and my teaching reaches in any capacity. So even if this is your first time meeting me, and hello, welcome in, leave a comment and let me know that you are watching or listening today. Or if you're returning, if you're a partner, if you're a client, if you're a friend, welcome, welcome, welcome. Please comment and let me know that you are here as well. But again, each and every one of you is so prayed over as we go into this teaching. And I am excited about what is going to happen in your inner world over these next few moments today. There is something here for you today. And I pray that you open up your hearts to receive all of it, everything that is here for you. This is about to be a day that you remember forever. If you already trust me on that, go ahead and share this video with somebody and tell them I want you to watch or listen alongside me. Let's both have a breakthrough. Let's both have a life-changing day. And if you're new to me, if you're skeptical, if you're not sure yet, that's also okay. And I would invite you to just open up your heart, lean in, take some notes, and see if it doesn't just speak to you in a powerful way today. And you can share on the back end. Maybe you'll be ready to share by then. But what I want to share with you today comes from a story that Jesus told. And it is a story that I heard many, many times in Sunday school growing up. It is a story that if you are familiar with the teachings of Jesus or Christianity, if you've spent any time in church, the likelihood is high that you have heard this story taught in some way before. And I want to clarify here because I know there are people watching this who come from every religion and no religion, every belief system imaginable, people who have never been in a church, people who don't even know what they believe anymore, people who are on staff with a religious organization, people whose beliefs are in transition. I know there is a wide spread of people who are watching and listening to this today. And there's a massive spectrum in terms of where you're at on your own journey. But I want you to know, I am not here to tell you that you have to believe something. I am not here to convert anybody to a particular religion or doctrine or organization. I am not here to judge you or your path or your journey in any way. But I believe that there is a message of love for you today that no matter what you believe in terms of religion or spirituality will heal your soul in a powerful way if you let it. This is a spiritual story, a metaphysical story, a story about love in the deepest and the highest way. A story about what it feels like to lose your way and get lost. And a story about how to find what you've been looking for all along. Or maybe more accurately, to let yourself be found. As I mentioned, this is a story from the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth that is recorded for us in one of those narratives. The text tells us here that Jesus is starting to get a reputation for being seen with tax collectors and notorious, quote unquote, sinners. And I'm not going to go into a history lesson here. I'm not going to nerd out too much because we have a lot to get to today. But I just want you to know the context of this story is that Jesus is spending time around people that are very judged by society, that are very shamed in this society, that nobody wanted to be friends with, to be associated with, to be seen with. We're talking about here, particularly on the tax collector front, people who are considered traitors in that world, people who exploited others, people who had major scandals, people who had caused harm and suffering, people who were not accepted or welcome anywhere in society. And the context of this story is that is the crowd that Jesus is known for spending time around. This story was spoken in the context of the fact that Jesus truly believed nobody was separate from love, that nobody was out of reach for unconditional love, that nobody was too far gone. And so this story is for you today. This message comes to you today right where you are. And I also want to point out here, just with the context, I find it interesting that they put on Jesus guilt by association. And as I was studying and preparing for this, I couldn't help but notice that and think, wow, what a wild relevance for our world today, where guilt by association is such a real thing, at least on social media, right? At least social media will convince you that it is. And if you even have the wrong association with somebody who has been canceled, somebody who has done something unforgivable, somebody who is labeled problematic, you can be accused of guilt by association. And that's literally what it was. It's not that they're calling Jesus a tax collector. It's not that they're calling Jesus a notorious sinner. They're simply saying, this is guilt by association, and we don't think you should be associating with these people. We don't think you should let someone, quote unquote, problematic affect your reputation. And to answer their allegations and accusations and guilt by association talking points here, Jesus tells them a series of stories to help them understand how God feels about people who get lost. And if you have felt a little lost in your life recently, maybe even a lot lost, if you felt alone or isolated, ashamed or guilty, regretful or confused, or just unsure who you are or what to do next or how to get out of the mess you're in, this message has found you on purpose today. And I believe these stories were told, but more importantly, these stories were recorded so that you could hear a message from the heart of God about people who feel lost, people who lose their way. And so we're about to explore together my favorite of these stories, and really my favorite story from Sunday school world that has lingered with me the most ever since. A story that comes to every lost soul. If you want to look this up, you can find this text online. It is in Luke 15. Luke 15. And if you want a beautiful, easy to understand way to read it, I recommend typing in on Google Luke 15, the Passion Translation. Luke 15, the Passion Translation. This story in particular has a father who represents God. And I want to remind you, this is a story and a metaphor, right? So the point of this is not a literal dad. This story is not about a man in the sky with a long beard and a rocking chair. There is a father in this story, and it is a metaphor. And I pray that you hear this as a divine message for you today in any language that you can receive it. There are a dozen other stories we could use to teach this principle that have something other than a father to represent the divine, but I felt called to share this one and to teach this one today. But I wanted to say, I commend you if you're willing to keep your mind and heart open to this training, even if you don't normally like the God word, even if you don't normally learn from something that came from Jesus, and even if the idea of a father representing God in a story is more triggering than it it is comforting to you. I get it. I've been there. And thank you for staying with me and keeping your heart and mind open. It is a metaphor, but it is a powerful message today. And so the story begins. Once there was a father with 2 sons. And the younger son came to his father and said, "Father, don't you think it's time to give me my share of your estate?" And so the father went ahead and distributed between the 2 sons their inheritance. Now, I want to pause here because notice something. When do we distribute an estate? And I'm going to try to avoid saying a word that I believe YouTube does not want me to say here, but think about this for a second. When do we distribute an estate? It's after somebody's life has come to an end and they are no longer with us. That's when we pull out the will. That's when the people get the inheritance. That's when we distribute an estate. And it's important to note this because the son in this story was saying, I don't actually care whether or not you are even living anymore. I just want my inheritance. I just want the goods. I just want my part of the estate. I don't care about you. I don't even care if you're alive anymore. I just want what's coming to me. And I want to point this out for 2 reasons here, because there's an important manifestation principle here for anyone who can hear it and receive it. First of all, when we try to receive from the source with no connection to the source, it will never satisfy. It will never be as joyful and fulfilling and meaningful as it otherwise could be. It will never have love in it. And so even if we get what we thought we wanted, we may wake up one day and realize there is no presence, there is no joy, there is no connection here, there is no safety here, there is no trust here. And so I want to offer to you, God is the source of all that there is. And yes, it is an infinite source and an unending supply. But may I offer to you today, don't try to receive from the source with no connection to the source, with no love from the source, with no guidance from the source, because it won't work the same and it won't feel good in the end. You know, 8 years ago, at the time of this original recording, I had a coach ask me, "Can I ask, Stephan, why is it that in all your spiritual teachings and writings and posts, can I ask, why is it that you don't use the word God? You might say source, you might say spirit, you might say the universe, but can I ask, out of curiosity, I've noticed, why is it that you don't say God?" And I know that might be odd for some of you who are used to my teaching here now, or for some of you that this is your introduction to me, because clearly now I am very comfortable using the word God in my teaching and my work and my ministry. But at the time I didn't, especially not in my posts. And the question caught me off guard initially, and yet subconsciously, I knew what the answer was. I knew something was going on there. I knew the very thing that would trigger me about that question was something I needed to look at. And I just want to say, if the God thing feels a little bit fragile to you today, that's okay. And you're not alone there. And I really, really, really understand what it's like to be there and to feel that way. And I hope you can hear my heart in this teaching. I have no judgment on that whatsoever, because I understand people who end up in a place where even though they're very spiritual, they're not sure that they even want to use the word God anymore. It's usually not coming from arrogance. It's usually not coming from ego. What I found is 90% of the time, it's usually coming from a wound, coming from a place of hurt or doubt or fear. And, I can speak for myself and say, I didn't want to use the God word because at that time, I felt afraid. I felt disconnected. I felt unsure. And I wasn't certain that God really liked me. I wasn't certain that God wanted to bless me and give me good things. I wasn't certain that God was with me, that God would unconditionally accept me, that God was truly on my side. I wasn't sure. And it felt fragile because I wasn't really sure that I was loved, and I wasn't really sure that I could trust. And so if you're there, I want to say, I see you and I love you, and you are not alone. But I hope you realize today, you do actually want to be loved and to feel loved and to be able to receive it and let it in fully. And so please don't make the mistake of thinking, I'm just going to go after the inheritance. I'm just going to go after the stuff. I'm just going to go after the goods. And even if I've never resolved my God trauma, even if I still don't feel certain that I'm loved, maybe it will be enough that I've made millions, that I have a beautiful life, that I've been an external success. And I believe the reason some of you have been drawn to this message today is because there is a part of you that deep down subconsciously knows the stuff is not going to cut it if you don't feel loved and you don't feel safe and you don't feel like you can trust. And so I wanted to make this point here. Please don't try to just receive from a source without the love piece, with no connection. But I also wanted to highlight this because it's interesting to me that the son in this story was asking for something that already had his name on it, that was already en route, that was already on the way. And yet, he wasn't willing to trust the process. He didn't want there to be a relationship. He didn't want there to be a journey. He didn't want there to be a span of time and delayed gratification. And so this was always going to be his inheritance. And it was always on the way to him. And it already had his name on it. But where he went wrong in this story, and this is a powerful metaphysical principle, is he insisted on, I cannot wait for this thing. I cannot wait for this thing. In fact, I will not wait for this thing. And note, in light of our very last teaching, for those of you who saw it or heard it, there is a big difference between believing in the now and refusing to go on a journey, refusing to step into a process, refusing to persist in consciousness. I actually believe many people sabotage their manifestations because they have a bratty, impatient part of their consciousness, and I get it, and I have it in me too, so no judgment here, but I think a lot of people have a bratty, impatient part of their consciousness that says, it better happen now or I quit. It better happen right now or this doesn't work. It better happen right now or I'm throwing in the towel. I'm walking away. I'm giving up on all of this, on the dream, on the vision. and I think about how many people have unnecessarily suffered, and or how many people have sabotaged their vision because they felt like, I must see the final product right now or I quit. And the truth that this reveals is sometimes we can demand something. And we talked about last time, God says yes. Life says yes. The reality of creation says yes. And it will show up for us. We get to have it. You know, there's a story in the ancient Jewish scriptures where the people didn't have to have a king. It wasn't meant for them. It wasn't actually helpful for them. It certainly wasn't required for them. But they got lost in comparison. They started getting distracted by what everybody else around them was doing. And I said to a client the other day, notice the way that comparison sucks the energy right out of the room. Right out of your life, right out of the vision. Notice the way that comparison will kill your energy and your momentum and your joy faster than anything else. And so in that particular story, they demand a king. And God says, you don't need this, but you have free will. You get to create, you get to choose. And so if you want a king, you can have a king. And so they get the thing that they demanded so much, and then they ended up having to deal with the effects of the thing they chose at cause, and that is basic cause and effect 101. But I bring this up to say, I do believe, though this might be controversial, that in the manifestation conversation, there are things that we get to choose. We get to create them. We get to have them if we so desire and so insist. But it might not be our destiny. It might not be our highest and best. And you can be sure that that is the case if it's something that you only want because somebody else has it or told you to want it. You can be sure that that is the case if it comes from your ego and not your soul. You can be sure that that is the case if the part of you that wants it is coming from fear or emptiness or lack rather than from love and wholeness. But the fact of the matter is, we do always have free will, and we are always creating, and we always get to choose. And so the son in this story says, I demand to have it now. I demand to have it now. I don't trust in any timing or intelligence or love that is bigger than me. I just demand to have it now. And he gets to have it. And so the text says, shortly afterward, the younger son packed up all his belongings and traveled off to see the world. He journeyed to a far-off land where he soon wasted all that he was given in a binge of extravagant and reckless living. Now, I want you to put a pin in this, okay? Remember this phrase. He wasted all he was given. We're going to come back to that phrase later on. It's going to have a relevance later on. So put a pin in that. Remember that phrase. He wasted all he was given. But let's talk about what happens next in the story here, right? Because the son gets the inheritance that, again, was never under threat, was always meant for him, was always going to be his in the end. But he says, I demand it, I can't wait, I need it, I need it, I need it now. And he gets the inheritance. And he goes into a series of what the text calls binging decisions and reckless living. You know, the word binge means excessive, unrestrained indulgence. And I really feel called to make a distinction here because notice, desire is not the problem here. The problem is not wanting something. The problem is not having a vision. The problem is not having a dream in your heart. The problem is not wanting to enjoy your life. And I want to be very clear here. Desire is not the issue here. But can we be mature enough in our personal growth and spirituality conversation to recognize that there is a difference between desire and desperation? There is a difference between desire and addiction. There is a difference between desire and binging. And you get to have whatever you want. And you get to create whatever you choose. And you have the principle of free will operating for you no matter what. But let's be mature enough on an emotional level, on a spiritual level, to recognize there is a distinction here. And a series of desperate choices, addicted choices, needy choices, binging choices, reckless choices is not a path of living from your heart and from your soul. That doesn't mean that you're going to be judged for it. That doesn't mean that you're no longer loved. That doesn't mean that you should take on guilt or shame, but there is a distinction. Desire is not the same thing as desperation. Desire is not the same thing as addiction. Desire is not the same thing as binging and recklessness. I wrote this quote down and I think it's just brilliant. Corey Muscara says, desire is what we have when we feel whole within ourselves. Desire is born out of wholeness. Cravings are what we have when we feel empty. Desire is what we have when we feel whole. Cravings are what we have when we feel empty. And I believe this is one of the most important principles that I could teach in this training today, because please don't get your cravings mixed up with your true soul's desire. There's a lot of reasons that we can want something and it's not coming from our soul, but I think this is a particularly important one for us to see. There is a whole category of things that we only want when we feel empty, when we feel ugly, when we feel unworthy or unwanted or not good enough, when we feel lack, when we feel scared. There's a whole category of things, and they're just cravings. And cravings, this is a Stephan definition here, cravings are our mind's way of dysfunctionally trying to meet a true need. Cravings are our mind's dysfunctional way of trying to get that need met. And I wanted to ask you today, what are you choosing from your emptiness? What are you choosing from your emptiness? Maybe it's people. Maybe it's an environment or an activity. Maybe it's a pattern. Maybe it's an addiction. Maybe it's a habit. Whatever it is, what are you choosing only from your emptiness? Because I would offer you today, that could be why it doesn't feel good in the end, because it's not your true self, your real self, your highest self choosing that thing or even desiring that thing. It's just where your subconscious mind goes when you feel empty. And there is a truth today that binge behavior, reckless behavior, craving-driven behavior doesn't change how loved you are. And that is the truth. It could never change how loved you are. But it can create disappointing outcomes. You know, the entire reason that I do what I do, that I do this work, that I put these teachings out here for you is I want you to live as joyful and fulfilling and abundant of a life as you possibly can. I want you to live all of your destiny, and I want you to be 100% fulfilled and satisfied with your life. I want you to get everything you want and more. And I'm teaching this principle here in the story, though it might be a little uncomfy, because I want to help somebody understand today, what is the path that leads you to disappointment? Even if there's something appealing there, even if there's something addicting there, I want you to see today, this is why I end up disappointed. I end up feeling crappy. I end up unsatisfied at the end of that path. You know, I remember one time I was talking to my coach, and really, if I'm being honest, we were talking about something that was a pattern for me. Something that I had been in avoidance around, something that I hadn't wanted to look at or address for a very long time. And we're talking about it in a session on a call, and I said, you know, I'm going to have to forgive myself for this thing. I remember my coach said to me, as we're talking about this thing that, as I acknowledged, had really become a pattern, she said, you know, self-love does, of course, mean forgiving yourself. And I want you to forgive yourself every single time, as many times as needed. But also, could we be open to the idea that maybe self-love also means eventually I stop making that decision over and over and over again that I'm going to have to forgive myself for later? What if self-love means eventually I get to the point where I love myself enough to have foresight. I love myself enough to see where that path is going to lead before I go all the way down it. I love myself enough to say, I'm not going to choose that thing that only comes from emptiness. I'm not going to choose the craving and the binging and the dysfunction. I'm not going to choose the thing that I will one day have to forgive myself for if I can recognize it in the moment. And that was very powerful for me, because I will still always give myself forgiveness every single time. I will never withhold forgiveness from myself, but there are also many moments where I catch myself in the moment and I say, you know what, Stefan, this is not who you want to be. This is not something you're going to be glad you said to that person in 24 hours. This is not the highest version of yourself. And self-love means I can recognize that and I can make a different choice. So the text goes on to say, with everything spent and nothing left, the son grew hungry because there was a severe famine in the land. And I'm going to withhold my theology nerd self here because I have to stay on track with this story. There's so much today. But I want to point out, there are so many stories in these ancient texts about famine that specifically speak to famine. And what they all seem to want us to know is that two people can go through the same famine and have a very different experience. I believe that's why we have all of these stories where there's a famine in the land and one person is struggling, but another person finds a way to thrive, finds a way to prosper, finds a way to be abundant. And I believe we have all of these stories here to tell us nothing outside of you could ever be more powerful than what is within you. And you always get to choose, and you always get to create. And even in a famine, you're not locked into one set in stone experience. Even with the changing world, the changing climate, the changing economy, the change in technology, the change in governments, all of these changes happening, you are never without your inner power. And you get to keep creating there. You get to keep choosing the experience that you are going to have there. And I just found that striking about all the ancient stories that mention a famine. But again, we're in this story that is a metaphor, and it tells us there was a famine in the land. And I'm looking at my notes here, and I'm realizing there's one more thing I want to say. And God, I pray that you take some notes, that you soak this teaching in, that you come back to it a couple times, because I am not withholding anything. I'm not Xing out any sections or points here. I am giving you all of the gold that was given to me for you over the last week in this teaching. But there is so much here, even in these little nuggets. So I pray that you return to this teaching at another time. And by the way, if it is speaking to you, take a second, like this video, leave a comment. I would appreciate that so much. But the other thing that I wanted to point out here is, we're going to have it confirmed later on in the story that the Father's home has no famine. The Father's home is still in abundance. The Father's home is still in prosperity. And one of the things I think this represents metaphysically and spiritually is that separation always creates an experience of lack, an experience of pain, an experience where things feel like they're going downhill. One of my favorite spiritual texts, you all hear me mention it all the time, A Course in Miracles says, we think that we have so many different problems, but at the end of the day, many of them boil down to just one. And that is our sense of separation, or more specifically, our false belief that we are in fact separate from God. Our false belief that we are in fact separate from God. And so I want to point out here, everybody is not experiencing famine. It wasn't a requirement to experience famine. But when we start to create for ourselves an experience of separation from our source, separation from who we really are, separation from love, we use our free will to start creating an experience of lack and pain and suffering that we didn't have to create in the first place, and we certainly don't have to continue. And if you are there today, don't be sad about that. Don't be frustrated about that. Don't be overwhelmed about that, because right here, right now is a fresh starting point of creation. And you get to choose again. Somebody please type that out in the comments and give us a timestamp. Right here and right now is a fresh starting point of creation. And I get to choose again. So the son is living in separation from home, separation from love, separation from who he really is and where he belongs. And now there is a famine, and he's having a very unenjoyable experience. And the text says, so he begged a farmer in that country to hire him. And the farmer hired him and sent him out to feed the pigs. And the son was so famished, he was willing even to eat the slop given to the pigs, because no one would feed him a thing. And God, be with me and help me as I teach this now, because there is so much in every single line of this story, and I don't want to waste any of it or miss any of it. I want it all to speak to you so powerfully today. But this is so important to catch, because in this culture and in this religion, pigs are considered unholy. You may be aware of that. That may be obvious, or you may not be. But in this culture and in this religion, and according to their laws and rules and customs, pigs are considered unholy. So he shouldn't be around pigs. He shouldn't be touching pigs. He certainly shouldn't be eating pigs. And yet the symbolism in this story is very intentional because it's actually a step beneath that. It's not just that he's touching pigs or around pigs or eating pig, all of which would have been considered unholy, all of which would have been considered out of bounds, right? But it's a step below that because he ends up eating the food for the pigs. That's the level of desperation. That's the level of lack. That's the level of shocking, jarring separation from where he belonged and where he called home and where he came from, that he ends up eating the slop that was made for the pigs. And no one would feed him a thing. And I have to tell you, as somebody who did not grow up really with money and then made it myself, and I'm not saying self-made, I had lots of help, lots of mentors, lots of support, but as someone who made money as an adult and then experienced what it is like to be in the world with money, it's a painful thing to wake up and realize there are people who were in your life only because of what you could give them, only because of what they needed from you, only when you were paying the bill. I've been there before. I've had dark moments in my journey of expansion where I had to process that before. And so I really feel, it's like an imaginary story, but I really feel for the son in this story where it says, and no one would feed him a thing. Because you have to know that when he was fresh off that inheritance, when he had all that money in the account, when he was paying for everything, all those wild nights, you have to know, everybody wanted to know him then. Everybody wanted to be his friend then. But now it's all run out. And now he is stuck in crippling shame, and it says no one would feed him a thing. And I feel for him. I know it's just a metaphor, but I feel for him in this story because he is so lost and he knows it. And his mind and his heart and his consciousness are overrun with shame. And they say psychologically, shame is often the lowest and the hardest emotional experience for human beings to go through. Because sometimes shame makes you feel like there's something fundamentally just wrong about who you are. That it's never going to get better, that you don't get to be happy or have good things like everybody else, that you've messed it up too badly, that it's all your fault. Shame can be a very dark voice. But then the text says, then he came to himself. And I'm getting so excited. My heart is lit up as I'm teaching this today, because many of you who are connected to this training right now, the biggest breakthrough of all that you could have today is to come to yourself. Not to somebody else's answer, not to more judgment or guilt or shame, not to a place of isolation and fear and hiding, but for many of you, the biggest breakthrough of all would be for you to come to yourself today. And the text says, then he came to himself. And I can just feel the light bulb moment, the aha moment, something clicking. It was like for the first time in ages, he could see the light at the end of the tunnel. He could see that it didn't have to be this way. He could see that there was hope. Just like I pray there are people watching and listening today, and You are coming to yourself in this moment. And for the first time in a long time, you can see that it doesn't have to be this way. For the first time in a long time, you can see that this is a season, but not the rest of your life. For the first time in a long time, you can see that change is here and available. And so he came to himself and he thought, there are many workers at my father's house who have all the food that they want with plenty to spare. They lack nothing. Why am I here, hungry, feeding these pigs and eating their slop? I want to go back home to my father's house, and I will say to him, Father, I was wrong. I have sinned against you. I'll never again be worthy to be called your son. Please, Father, just treat me like one of your employees. Now, we're going to pause here because the son has a plan. And many of you know this story. Many of you have heard it a million times. And so you know what's about to happen. We're going to read in a moment what happens when the son goes to enact the plan. But I just want to articulate what the energy of this plan is all about here, right? Because everything in this story is significant. This is not a history book. This is a metaphor of a story. Everything in this story has a meaning to it. So the son has a plan, and he thinks to himself, this is not it. This is not working out. I don't want to live in this another day longer. So when does the separation end? Today. When does the suffering end? Today. When does this season end? Today. And so the son's in a position where he says, well, I've wasted the inheritance. I've spent everything I was given. It is all gone. I have nothing left and nobody wants me anymore. I don't like where the cravings have led me. I don't like what the binging created. I don't like where I ended up. I don't like what I'm now responsible for. I don't like who I've become. I don't like how I'm showing up now. I don't like what has now become my life. And again, my heart goes out to people today. I know there's somebody listening to me right now, and that is literally how you feel. That is the exact version of feeling lost that you are living in right now. You can't stand the circumstances of your life right now, but more importantly, you don't like where you've ended up. You don't like who you've become. But you don't have to stay there. Just like the son in this story, you don't have to stay there a day longer, a night longer, a moment longer. And so the son is formulating a plan, and he says, let me try to be welcomed back as a servant. Notice, he assumes he's not welcome back in the family. He assumes they don't want him anymore. He assumes that he's not even possibly welcome back as a son. But even the idea of working on the grounds as an employee for the father is more appealing than where the separation took him. And so his plan is, let me try to go back, to go home, and to be welcomed back as a servant. So the text says, the young son set off for home. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, dressed as a beggar. And great compassion swelled up in his heart for his son who was returning home. And the father raced out to him and met him and swept him up in his arms and hugged him dearly and kissed him over and over with tender love. And the son said, and I'm not going to quote it again, but the son begins the speech, right? The speech I read to you that he had prepared. But the father interrupted and said, son, you're home now. You're home now. No speech required. Shut that down. You're home now. And turning to his servants, the father said, quick, bring me the best robe, my very own robe, and I will place it on his shoulders. Bring the ring, the seal of sonship, and I will put it on his finger, and bring out the best shoes that you can find for my son. Let's prepare a great feast and celebrate, for my beloved son was once dead, but now he's alive. Once he was lost, but now he is found. And everyone celebrated with overflowing joy. I love this story. I love this story. And I want to talk about a few things here. I want to talk about the fact that the son was still a long way off. And he was met fully with love. The text literally says, while he was still a long way off. The father ran, the father moved, the father went to meet him there. And I know some of you feel lost. Some of you feel like you are a long way off from who you used to be, and maybe not in a good way. A long way off from who you can be, a long way off from who you're called to be or meant to be. But I want you to hear today that all of love is right where you are. It's not far away. It has not left you. It has not abandoned you. And while the principle of free will means that we all get to create both wholeness and illusion, and only we can make the choice. And if we choose to live in an experience of separation, we can choose it and we can create it, and it will feel real and it will be our life in that moment. But I want you to hear, the Father never stopped loving the Son. The Father never stopped welcoming the Son. The Father never stopped waiting and looking for the Son. Notice this very significant detail in the story, that the Father was outside on the road just looking for him. That's the only way the Father could have seen him, from outside the gates. The Father was out there looking for him, because all of love is right where you are, and it will meet you. Even if you're a long way off, that is not a barrier, that is not a block, that is not a problem. For the power of love, love will meet you, even a long way off. And all of love is right where you are, and God has been just waiting for you to be ready to receive. I wanted to tell somebody today, you might have gotten disconnected from your source somewhere along the way, but you never stopped being loved. You never stopped being a child of God. You never stopped being on God's mind and heart. That's so powerful. You might have gotten so disconnected that you felt numb for years, that you haven't thought about this stuff in ages. But you've never stopped being loved. You've never stopped being a child of God. You've never stopped being on the Father's mind and heart, as this story tells us. And I also want you to notice, the Father won't even entertain the ask he had in mind about becoming a servant. The Father doesn't even want to hear it. The Father cuts off the speech entirely, because to him, this is still the Son, and he would never stop being a son, and he would never be unwelcome. And all the Father is interested in doing is reassuring him by calling him son. I am so passionate about this story. I'm getting emotional over here. I feel like I was born sometimes to teach this story because it is so important and it is so powerful. But do you see the significance that the son is ready to give a speech, is ready to submit a resume, is ready to try to re-enter the household as an employee and a servant? And the Father begins, the very first word out of his mouth in the story is a reassurance of identity. And you have heard me say before, identity is so important in doing the inner work because your life will ultimately reset back to who you believe that you are. It's interesting to think about. If this son wasn't used to being a son in a wonderful, prosperous household, maybe he wouldn't have come back. Maybe he wouldn't have even considered that. Maybe he would have just accepted slaving away, feeding the pigs. But there was an identity somewhere in there that spoke louder to him than anything in his situation. And it is just a truth. It is a metaphysical truth that our lives reset back to our identity at the end of the day. And that is why it is so important to do the work on that level, because you will not out-manifest how you see yourself. You will not outperform. You will not outwork the way that you see yourself. The identity will win out in the end. And there is somebody watching this today, and the breakthrough that you need is you need an identity upgrade to where you really receive that you are a child of God, and you stop trying to earn it, and you stop trying to get your resume together, and you stop trying to achieve love, and you stop trying to prepare your speech. You stop trying to figure out how you're going to get back in as a servant or tiptoe in as a servant. Somebody watching this today, you need an identity truth that is unshakable for you from this day forward, that you are a child of God and nothing will ever change that. And I think it's incredible that the very first word out of the Father's mouth is son. Because in this story, the Father wants him to know, you are still every bit my son. I can tell that it did not go well. I know the inheritance is gone that I gave you. I know I'm not seeing that money ever again. But the first word out of the Father's mouth was son. He's not interested in karma. He's not interested in retribution. He's not interested in punishment or consequences. He knows separation from love is the punishment itself. And the Father begins by calling him son. And then he speaks this timeless, eternal truth that I speak over you today. You're home now. You're home now. Breathe that in, somebody, today. You are home now. And I will tell you, it was at this very point in preparing this training and working through my notes that I burst into tears as I was typing this out, because I was praying over this training and I was praying for you specifically. And I just know someone is feeling this so strongly as I teach. And I want you to hear, you are home now. And you could never be separate from love, and you never have to leave ever again. And I wanted to read these words to you from Rob Bell about this story and about this text. He says, God has a purpose, a desire, a goal, and God never stops pursuing it. Jesus tells a series of parables in Luke 15 about a woman who has a coin, a shepherd who loses a sheep, and a father who loses a son. But the stories aren't ultimately about things and people being lost. The stories are about things and people being found. The God that Jesus teaches us about doesn't give up until everything that was lost is found. This God simply doesn't give up ever. And I felt called to share with you today as I teach this, in one of the darkest moments of my entire life, when I felt so alone, when I wasn't even sure that I had a good future, that there was anything worth sticking around for, that I even wanted to be alive anymore. I remember the voice of God came to me so clearly and said, I'm right here, and I love you more than you can imagine or comprehend. And just so you know, no matter how your life played out, or what you chose, or where you ended up, I want you to know, I would come into any universe, into any timeline, into any situation, just to find you. I love you that much. And I believe that is a word for somebody today, that God is right there where you are, that God loves you more than you can imagine. And just so you know, no matter how your life played out or what you chose, God would come into any universe, into any situation, into any timeline, just to find you. And in all of these stories, Jesus is making the point to us that God cares so deeply about anyone who has lost their way, that heaven wouldn't be heaven unless all the children found their way back home to love. And I feel so moved as I teach today, probably in a way I never have before. And I know there's somebody feeling this so strongly, but I also believe there may be somebody out there who is not sure if they receive this message today, who is still hesitant, who is still skeptical. Just as I know there are surely people who feel this is too good to be true. People who feel that this can't be the quote-unquote real gospel. Or people who feel that for one reason or another, this doesn't apply to them. And before we wrap up, and I'm going to pray beautifully for each and every one of us, and we're going to open our hearts together, I pray that you will stick with me to the end, and if you need to go, that you'll come back and finish this training with me. But I want us to talk about the final part of this story that we are given here, because after the party is going for the younger brother, who has been welcomed home immediately, the older brother, the other son that you may have forgotten about from the very beginning of the story, the older brother says, Father, listen, how many years have I worked like a slave for you, performing every duty you've asked? And I've never once disobeyed you, but you've never thrown me a party. Never once have you even given me a goat that I could feast on and celebrate with my friends. But look at him. He comes back. My younger brother comes back after wasting your wealth on prostitutes and reckless living. And here you are throwing a great feast to celebrate. For him, of all people. And the father said, My son, you are always with me by my side. Everything that I have is yours to enjoy. And then he essentially goes on to say, but we're going to celebrate. My son is back. My son is no longer lost. And we are going to celebrate. And you know, it's interesting. I've always kind of loved this part of the story, even though it's not per se a happy part of the story, because I just think it shows the wisdom of Jesus in telling it. And I think it's so real. I think it's so relatable. You know, all of us have a little bit of that older brother energy somewhere in our consciousness. There is somebody we look down on. There is somebody that we look at and we go, now, why are they blessed? There is somebody that we are jealous of, that we have a hard time celebrating, that we really don't think deserves good things. And really at the crux of it, I think a lot of the problem is many of us just don't do well with unconditional love. We don't really believe in unconditional love. And so we want to go into, just like the older brother, a whole speech about conditions. The older brother is pissed because he thinks that this is all about being deserving, about being good enough, about earning it. And Jesus tells this story, not just for the sake of the people who think they're too far gone, that they feel so lost, they think they've already screwed it all up. Jesus tells this story, maybe even more specifically, to make a point to people who think they're doing great, to people who think they have all the answers, to people who think they have it figured out. The people who know it all, the arrogant experts, the ones who never celebrate but live disgruntled because they feel they deserve one, the ones who see everything as black and white, right and wrong, and somehow they are never in the wrong, the ones who think that they have all the right theology, the ones who think that they get to determine who gets in and who does not. Jesus tells this story for those people, and I remember reading Rob Bell's writing about this story in college and being so moved as Rob Bell made the point that this story proves to us it is not about how good you are. And it's not about how bad you are or how bad someone else is either. It never was. It's never been about your achievement, and it's never been about your failure. It is about the unconditional and unending love of God that is a party that everyone is forever invited to. That's what this story is about. So 3 powerful takeaways for you today. Number 1, nothing could ever change the fact that you are a child of God. This is such an important piece here, because the son didn't have to ask for forgiveness. The son didn't have to work his way back into the good graces. The son didn't even have to give the speech. It was cut off entirely. The father said, I don't need that speech to welcome you back, because you were always going to be welcomed back. You were always going to be accepted. And you are already forgiven for everything. You are always and forever going to be loved. And I think of the words from A Course in Miracles where it says, if you have been forgiven, you have everything else, and you have indeed been forgiven. There is nothing you have to make right. There is nothing you have to atone for. There is nothing that you have to fix before you can be loved. Because number one, nothing could ever change the fact that you are a child of God. Number two, the inheritance is yours, whether you choose to use it or not. The inheritance is yours, whether you choose to use it or not. Now, remember I said, let's put a pin in this. Let's make a mental note on the line. He wasted all that he was given. And I want to come back to that now, because notice the supply never ran out. It wasn't gone. The Father wasn't broke or hurting or in lack, because all of that was spent and all of that was gone. And I pray that that shows us the principle today. There is always more. There is always divine compensation. And even if you feel like you wasted time or messed it up or blew the opportunity that you had, that you didn't take advantage of something, that you dropped the ball, that you didn't stick with it, that you weren't consistent, whatever it is, there is always more. There is an unending supply. There is always divine compensation that you can claim. And unconditional love has no shortage of chances, no shortage of opportunities, no shortage of possibilities for you. You have all the inheritance, you have all the power, you have all the possibilities still. And the inheritance is yours. Isn't it interesting that the father said to the older brother, everything that I have has always been yours. So you might not choose to celebrate, but it all belongs to you. You might not choose to throw a party, but that's on you, because it all belongs to you. I have given you all things richly to enjoy. And so you might not have realized it before, you might not have used it before, but it is all yours, and it always has been. And it always will be. And then truth number 3 I wanted to say here. God is not inviting you onto a payroll, but into a party. And that is some good alliteration if I've ever heard some. God is not inviting you onto a payroll, but into a party. You know, I have to say, Jesus seemed to like the energy of a party in his works and in his teachings. Jesus seemed to love to celebrate. And I will just insert this quickly here. The first miracle Jesus ever did was turning water to wine at a party, at a feast, at a wedding celebration. And I think that's so significant, because in these ancient cultures, something they would have been very familiar with is the idea of a god, one of the gods that they believed in, turning water to blood as a plague, as a punishment. That was a common ancient narrative. And I just find it so striking, okay, that Jesus shows up on the scene and says, you might be used to water turning to blood, and that's what God does. But I am going to show you a demonstration of water turned to wine. And I am telling you, God is like this. That God's unconditional love is a party that never ends, and you are not being invited onto a payroll today, but into a party. And I truly don't know anything more important that I could do with my life, with my teaching, with this video today, than to truly just invite people to join the party. It is already going. It is already raging. It is already incredible and breathtaking and so much fun. And you are invited to the party of unconditional love that has no beginning and no ends. here is the message that I felt called to share with you today. Again, I have so many notes because I type out exactly what I hear, but the invitation to the party is always, always, always open to you. And if in this moment you need to come home to yourself, or to love, or to God, to who you really are, to a better story and a truer story, the one that God is speaking to you and over you today. If in this moment you need to come home, the doors are always and forever open to you and just for you. And it doesn't matter when in the future this training reaches you, the doors are open to you and for you today. You can come home today. And I believe all of heaven is waiting outside the gates for you to remember who you really are and to open up your heart to that love. You know, I don't really believe that it actually takes doing anything on your part at all to join the party. Because the truth of the matter is, you could never be good enough for the party. You could never earn it. You could never be deserving. That's not the point. But you were always, always, always invited as a beloved child of God. And I speak this message right from this story, right from the words of Jesus to you today. You are home now. Beloved child, you are home now, and this is your homecoming. And this day is not just a new beginning for you and for your life. It is the beginning of a party of unconditional love that has always been available to you, that has always been meant for you. As I said, I'm going to pray with each and every one of you in a moment. And I very quickly want to say thank you, partners, for always giving, for always supporting me, for always staying connected and being a part and making teachings like this one possible. I'm not going to spend a long time on this section today. I don't feel called to do so. But I will tell you that as I continue my consistent, ongoing giving, I am sowing a seed of celebration and unconditional love. And I would invite any of you that want to join me today, partners, clients, new friends, old friends, even if you've never done anything like this before, and even if you never do it again, if you want to support this work and receive this message and participate in this moment in a very special way today, you are welcome to join us. You are welcome to give. And yes, as always, what you sow, you will reap. Yes, as always, the law is the law is the law. And yes, as always, I encourage you to give with an expectation of harvest. And we will put the link on the screen for you here, and use that link and use the section that lets you type in it. We call it the faith section around here. And tell me what you're believing for. I would love to be in agreement with you today. But I will tell you, specifically today for me, as I sow, and even as I sow the seed of this teaching onto this channel, onto this platform, all around the world, accessible and available to billions and billions of people, I am believing for the harvest of this message, specifically this teaching today, reaching people with unconditional love all over the world. There are so many people who feel lost and alone and are hurting right now. There are so many people who don't know how to get back home. There are so many people who are right now trying to decide if they can go on, trying to decide if maybe there's a way to get back as a servant, trying to decide if they would even be welcome or accepted if they try to come back to love. And I believe this is a message for so many. I believe this is a message that needs to reach and is meant to reach and is going to reach millions. And that is what I am sowing today. And that is what I would invite you to join me in agreement with today. And thank you, partners, for helping me spread a worldwide message of unconditional love. But I want us to go into a prayer time now. So if you are wanting to give today and you haven't yet, pause this video, use that link, share your vision with me in the faith section, and go ahead and take care of that now, and then come back and join me here. And when you're ready, if it's safe and comfortable for you to do so, close your eyes. And we just move into the prayer space together. And I say, thank you, God, for this story that was told and recorded for us, for the moments in our lives where we feel lost. Thank you, God, for the knowing that we have never lost our inheritance. Thank you, God, for the knowing that we can come home anytime, any day, any moment that we choose. Thank you, God, for this message and the way it has changed my life and spoken to me over and over and over again. And thank you, God, for the way that I know it is speaking to people right now. God, I feel somebody on the other end of this teaching in tears. Somebody on the other end of this teaching, their heart beating fast. Somebody on the other end of this teaching, and they don't even know why they're watching this or how they got here or why it's holding their attention, but there is a resonance. And it is your unconditional love reaching them right where they are. And so, God, I speak this word that in you we live and move and have our being. You are the source of our life. You are the one who has always been with us. You are the one who delights in prospering us, who gives us all things richly to enjoy, who comes with dreams 1,000 times as wonderful as anything we ever dared to dream or imagine. You are so good. This story was told so that we could hear and feel and receive that you are good. And you love us more than we can fathom. We could lose it all, and we are still just as loved. We could mess it up completely, and we are still just as loved. We could get completely disconnected from our source, and we would still be just as loved. So we rest in the calm, in the peace, in the reassurance of your presence right now. And we open up our hearts and we let the love in and we let you love us right now. God, what I know for sure, as A Course in Miracles says, is that when we receive love, it always expresses itself in the form of miracles. And I believe there are going to be millions of people who end up watching and listening to and receiving this training. And there are people connected to it right now across time and space all over the world. And God, they are letting you love them right now, just as they are right where they are. They're letting the love in right now. And you are speaking this identity truth over them. Child of God, you are home now. Child of God, you are home now. Child of God, you are home now. I bless them in this moment into a knowing of just how loved they are. I bless them into a knowing of who they are, into an identity truth that changes and alters and shapes the rest of their life in the best possible way. I bless them into joy. I bless them into a loving embrace. I bless them into a celebration and a happiness and a wonder as they rejoin the party that they have always been invited to, that has no beginning and has no end. God, I bless people out of illusion, out of fear, out of separation today and into wholeness. I bless people into a knowing of how loved they are. I bless people into a deep connection with you, where they let themselves enjoy relationship, enjoy connection, enjoy being loved, where they trust the timing, they trust the process, they trust the journey. God, I bless people out of any demands of desperation that come from a place of distrust. I bless people out of the cravings that only stem from emptiness. I bless people out of walking down the pathways that lead them to disappointment and disillusionment. And today I claim for every person connected to this training, this is a new beginning. This is a new, fresh start and perfect starting point. And they get to decide what comes next, and they get to co-create it with you. But most importantly, God, they are home now. Thank you, 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 thank you for this story. Thank you for its teaching. Thank you for the truth of how loved we are. I feel it, God. I feel your embrace right now. I feel myself resting in your everlasting arms. And I pray that every person watching and listening to this training feels it the same. And God, I just am speaking this as I intuitively feel called to speak it. But may they know, God, that unconditional love never changes. Even if and even when they don't feel it, it is still the truth. They are still a child of God, and they are still just as loved. God, we put everything into your hands, knowing it is blessed, knowing it multiplies, knowing it turns into overflow. I bless every one of my partners specifically. Thank you for them, God. Thank you for their giving. Thank you for their trust in me and their seed that is in this good ground. I bless every one of their visions and intentions and dreams. I bless them into joyful, bountiful harvest. And so it is, and so we are. Amen. This is a classic. I am just declaring this teaching an instant classic from this moment where I finished recording it. I loved getting to share this one with you. I think it is something so special. If you haven't yet, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for notifications. I would love to stay connected with you here. And now that you have heard the whole training, if there's a community that you have on social media, or if there's anyone specific that comes to mind and you believe this training would speak to them and serve them, please feel free to share it with them and just pass it on. But that is going to do it for this training. If you are new to my channel and you want to watch something next, go to the homepage of my channel. I highly recommend 2 series in particular for you. One of them is called My Secret Weapon for Continual Flow. One of them is called Increasing Your Faith. Both of those have so much gold in them, and they are both available as a gift from me to you, and they are available on the channel now. But I love you. I believe in you. The best is yet to come.